Hello, children. Today we will start off with the poem Where the Mind is Without Fear by Rabindranath Tagore. But before we start off with the poem, let's know about the poet. Now, Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel laureate, poet, writer, philosopher, was the ambassador of Indian culture to the rest of the world. Tagore is probably the most prominent figure in the cultural world of Indian subcontinent and the first Asian person to be awarded with the Nobel Prize. Even though he is mainly known as a poet, his multifaceted talent showered upon different branches of art such as novels, short stories, dramas, articles, essays, painting, etc., and his songs, popularly known as Ravindra Sangeet, have an eternal appeal and is permanently placed in the heart of the Indians. He was a social reformer, patriot, and above all, a great humanitarian and philosopher. India and Bangladesh, the national anthems of these two countries, are taken from his composition. Now, let's talk about the poem. It is a prayer to a universal father figure, that is, the God Almighty. The poem, with its inspiring lines, elaborates poet's vision of a new enlightened India. The poem was written by Rabindranath Tagore during the time when India was under the British rule and people were eagerly waiting and struggling to get freedom from the British rule. The poem is written in the form of a prayer to the God, the Almighty, for a true freedom for his country. And thus, Tagore reveals his own concept of freedom throughout the poem. Now, background of the poem. The poem, written originally in Bengali, was composed before India's independence, most probably in the year 1900. The original poem titled Prarthana was included in an anthology named Nabedya, and the poem was translated into English by Tagore himself around 1911. The poem is poem 35 in the English Gitanjali published in 1912. The poem had a special place in Tagore's heart and he recited its English version at the Indian National Congress session in Calcutta in 1917. Now let's talk about the theme. The poet Rabindranath Tagore envisages an ideal nation, liberal in outlook, united in strength, and dynamic in progress. The poet is totally devoted to God and entreats him that he must direct the poet's fellow countrymen to be industrious, truthful, and rational, so as to advance the country towards the most ideal stature. The poet desires peace and prosperity among his countrymen and prays that his country might attain overall welfare and self reliance. So, finally, the theme is the poet draws a picture of free India. He dreamt of a country with no boundaries. He prays for the welfare of the country. Now, structure of the poem. The poem is written in free verse without any rhyme scheme or meter and consists of just one sentence. The poem can be considered to consist of two sections. The first 7 lines with a series of adverbial clauses and the principal clause at the end. Now, to understand the poem easily, let's go through the meanings of a few words. Like when the poet says head is held high. Now here head is held high means that the poet is talking about self-respect. Now domestic walls. Now domestic here means India itself with her people. reason, intellect, understanding, dead habit, old customs, beliefs, and traditions. Now, let's start with the literary devices. The first one, anaphora, the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. Like you can see, every sentence starts with where. So, this is literary device anaphora. Now, next, alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of the same sound or letter at the beginning of each or most of the words in a sentence. Like for example, head is held high, H H H, bean broken, B B, dreary desert, D D. So this is alliteration. Now next, assonance. Now assonance is the repetition of vowel rhyme, like tireless, striving, clear, stream, reason. So this is assonance. Now next is metaphor. The big world is compared to many small rooms separated by narrow domestic walls. Now words coming out from the depth of truth gives us the impression of a fountain or spring on the comparative level. The clear stream of reason is a comparison between reason and a flowing stream. And the dead habit that chokes the clarity of reason is compared to the dreary desert. Now, freedom is regarded as heaven. Comparison of heaven as freedom. Freedom is compared to heaven. Now, next, synecdoche. Now, synecdoche is a literary device in which a part of something represents the whole, or it may use a whole to represent a part. For example, the word sails. When we talk about the word sails, it refers to a whole ship. Now, the word boots usually refers to the soldiers. Now, in the same way, the term Coke is a common synecdoche for all the carbonated drinks. Now, in the same way, now here in the poem, country means the people of the country. So, the country is the synecdoche of people. Now, next is personification. Now, tireless striving, which is an abstract idea, has been assigned with a human aspect in stretches its arm. Country, which is personified to be awake. Now, next is apostrophe, addresses an imaginary character, abstract, inanimate object in his speech, like my father, let my country. Now, next, imagery. The poet draws a picture of free India. He dreamt of a country with no boundaries. He prays for the welfare of the country. Now, let's start with the explanation part. The first line, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. Now, the first line of the poem, a part of which is the title itself, holds a very significant meaning. Fear in this line refers to the fear inculcated in the minds of the Indians under the British rule. Here the poet is speaking about the miserable life led by people dominated by the British. The poet envisions India as a country where the people's mind are free from fear and they live a dignified life. He also wants to convey that freedom can be attained only when the mind is fearless and the head is held high with respect and dignity. Now next, where knowledge is free. Now the poet says that gaining independence would also give them the freedom to acquire knowledge and be self-reliant, which was restricted during the British rule. The poet dreams of a nation where knowledge would be free. Education shouldn't be restricted to the upper crust only, but everybody should be allowed to accumulate knowledge without any discrimination. Not only that, but the youngsters should also learn free from the character and therefore the world around them. They ought not to be forced to memorize some predetermined lessons. And this is often Tagore's typical concept of education, that the students, children should be free to gain knowledge. The education should be accessible to all, irrespective of their caste, creed, religion, and so on. So, broadly, there should be no social layers that should stop people from taking education. There should be no discrimination for education, and one education for all without any discrimination. Now, next, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. Now, prejudices, discriminations divide people, they germinate the seed of hostility and all. So, the poet warns that there should not exist any form of difference among people based on caste, creed, language, religion, gender, and color. And prejudices and superstitions are the narrow domestic walls that divide us into groups, thereby breaking our unity and making us weak and fragile. Next, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. Now, the poet wishes that the people of his nation will be forthright and honest. Their words should come out from their hearts. Their words should be clear and distinct. The poet asks everyone to work hard without exhaustion to reach their desired goal. His countrymen should tirelessly stretch their arms towards perfection. They should work hard till they attain perfection. Now, the figure of speech used in the sixth line is personification, which we discussed earlier also. Tireless striving has been personified as human being stretching his arms to attain perfection in his desired mission, to achieve the goals. Now, next, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. Now, the poet uses metaphor for reason and habit. He refers to the reason as a clear stream that is pure and not contaminated. Here he is speaking about the thoughts of the people, which he says should be clear, noble, honest, and free from all sorts of corruption. If you remember, we discussed in the last line. And dreary desert sand of dead habit also refers to the evils in the society, like superstitious practices that lack logic and reason. Next, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action. Now, the poet wishes his countrymen to be liberal, progressive, and broad minded. He wants their minds to be led forward by the Lord Almighty into an ever widening world of thought and action. In short, we should always be open minded and do something unusual or extraordinary, overcoming the narrowness of mind. The countrymen should have a progressive approach and encourage new thoughts and ideas. Their minds should not be their minds should be led forward by the contemporary new objectives, and all superstitious and ill practices should be left behind for the progress of the country. Now, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Now, in the final line, the poet addresses Almighty as Father and prays to him to let his country wake up to such a heavenly abode of freedom where there is brightness, radiance, and confidence all around. The poet is asking him to awaken his people and help them reach that glorious place. So, to the poet, political freedom is not as important as it is for people to be fearless, dignified, knowledgeable, truthful, hardworking, and broad minded. And only then can true freedom be enjoyed by one and all. And this is what the poet wants to say. This is what the poet wants to convey to us through the poem. Now, children, let's read the poem as a whole. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth and tireless striving stretches towards perfection. The clear stream of reason hasn't lost its way into dreary sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom. My Father, let my country awake. My Father, let my country awake. By heaven granted. So hope all of you have understood the poem. Thank you, children. Have a great day ahead.